So up here, I'm looking at my flower here. Some people are going to want to get very botanical and put lots of little strokes in, but I'm thinking, how can I be effective with my time? And I think what I'm going to do, let's see what you can see. I'm going to look right up here, the idea. And I actually didn't make a perfect drawing. I left openings. So let's see, I'm just going to go ahead and get some water in spots. And I can always come back in later if I need to. And I need to decide what color. I'm going to use a 14 and a 20 in a second. I was going to use a Quinacridone Magenta, but I'm going to put a permanent rose in here. And a little bit of the Quinacridone Magenta. And I think I'll use my Winsor Blue Red shade just because it makes a cleaner color. All right, so I have an idea. Oops, you can't see. Right there. I have an idea what I want to do. So here I'm going to use my 14. Just touch a few spots. I think, is that a little too blue for me? Maybe I'll get a little more magenta. Maybe this is better, so you can see that. Okay, I'm just going to basically touch a few areas, and actually that seems a lot more fun to me. And touch a few lines, work my way around. Just like that. Okay. And then I think what I'm going to do is take my 20. I could use my 30, but what I'm going to do is just touch a few of these edges. If I use my 30, that might apply too much water. And I'm definitely not being really careful or thoughtful. I wanted it to be loose. I like the idea of some of those lost edges there. And I'll hold off with that for just a sec. And I'm thinking, do I want to bring my 30 down into this area? Maybe what I'll do is even allow some of that color to spill a little bit. So basically what I'm doing is building a foundation. Maybe touch a little more water up there, and then you can see it's starting to settle a little bit better. I'll bring water down in here. I'm trying to actually paint over a few lines. Just a few spots. I've got some dry spots, and maybe you can see where some of those tinted areas are. Now, if I use my 20 to apply color, I might apply too much color, which I might not want. Now, opera would be fun, but I don't have opera here. The problem with opera, it's a fugitive color, and then that is not going to be ideal. And a fugitive color means it ends up disappearing. And it'll be fine if you don't mind, if you want to play with it, but if you intend on selling, then that can easily be a problem. So like I said, this would be a foundation, and then what I would do is come back in and paint on top of this and find some of those shapes. Did you have a question?
A real quick one. What happens if you mix a fugitive color with a non-fugitive color?
It'll be beautiful, but the fugitive color can disappear. But you know what? It's like if you get a quinacridone, like they're making some of those fugitive colors now. They are making them, I think, better. With synthetic colors, like they call them like a quinacridone. So I would go ahead and check the rating on them, because you might be able to get away with it. When I first started painting, you really couldn't.
So, I'd like to ask if the opera pink is a fugitive color, and we brought that up. I understood that alizarin crimson was also a fugitive color.
Oh, yes.
But if you bought permanent alizarin crimson, it is not?
It's better. It's better, and permanent alizarin crimson is not, it'll stick around. Now, it is traditional for artists to use permanent or alizarin crimson. That's what artists have used for years. But with light on it, it can disappear. So that's not the fun part, you know. It's like if we want to just have fun, but if you can use it. But if you want, and actually, like opera, I think was more for designers originally. Okay, so basically, I'm just going to go. I notice I'm getting a tad fussy. Let's try to avoid getting fussy. Get some color in here, because this would also be another way that you can avoid overlapping lines right now. I'm using more of a looser technique, similar to that pansy. And then I'm working my way down. Let's see what I have here. We've got some lavenders. So let's go ahead and bring some lavenders in here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, bring that color down into this area. Now, I am intentionally allowing some of that color to escape. I don't know if I'm going to like that ultimately. Maybe I would want it more contained, but I thought that would just kind of allow some of those things to disappear and escape. So I wanted to just play with that, because I've thought about this for a while. How do I want to approach this? So I'm just getting some water in here. And then to make it a bit more lavender, I'm going to add more blue into it. Okay, let's see what we've got. And I'm not going to use a French ultramarine blue because that has like a sediment in there. Well, not sediment. It is, but it isn't. What do we call it? It has granulation in there. It's got a heavier pigment load. Not load, but pigments in there. So it settles into the surface of the paper. So I'm trying to shift this a bit more to the blues.
Okay, so I understand what you just said, but what color blue are you using?
This is the Winsor Blue red shade.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And no, but I'm just giving it a try. You know, I'm always experimenting. So maybe I would want to use, do I want to use a cobalt? I mean, I could get a nice lavender. You could use some of those pre-mixed lavenders, but I don't usually do that. So I'm just allowing the color to move around. I like how it mingles. There I would separate. Why this would work for me is because I could use those as highlights. That would work for, if you notice, there's some subtle highlights right in there. That through there, so that would be a great foundation for me. And then, so we're just trying to get some color in here. I'll try to speed this up actually a little bit. Let's get some in here. Okay, and then I would break that apart later, use my little bead of water like we do in so many of our classes and courses there. Move that around so I have a nice variation. And then I would come back and try to separate some of that out. This gives me that loose feel that I wanted. And then I would need to bring it over here to another flower. It's also fun if you want to get more detailed. You'll decide what works the best for you and what you want to do. But this is like a super quick little demonstration. And over here, I'll bring some of this and maybe a little more color up here, because I want to get to the shadow and I also want to get to the stems. So let's go ahead, get a little water in there because that got a little stuck. So by using the larger brush and going along the edge, I like that softness better than using this and pressing a little too hard. I don't think it's spilled in the same way, but it's okay. And if I look at this, I think that is a little stiff compared to everything else. So maybe what I'll do is take that clean water, bring it out here, and then maybe I'll even touch an edge to open it up. I'm going to scoot this over to the side.
No, I think it's beautiful already.
Oh, thank you.
I just love it.
I agree.
Oh, great. Phew. I thought, oh my God. You know, I have no, well, we don't know where this is going to go yet. You know, I've got the pencil line. I really appreciate that. And so That's going to dull down. Even if it blooms, I think it would lend itself very nicely for the sweet peas.
I just love the way it's transitioning down into colors and everything. It's just gorgeous.
Thank you.
So
Well, so what I would do then, because otherwise it's going to be flat, I need to then find some of my edges after that dries. So I'm going to take some of my yellow, and that's Hansa Yellow Light. It's what I have in my palette. And what if I took, I don't know if it's going to work with my Winsor Blue, if I'm going to like that. That's okay. I think I'd like it to be brighter. What I could do is even bring in that'll work. Okay, just trying to get some idea. And I guess I could scoot this over a bit more. Then, thinking about our stems, I thought this would be a lot of fun. Just trying to, I can't touch anything right in here because that's not going to work. So I'm going to use a little bead of water. So I'm holding my brush more like this. And then I'll bring it down, and I'm not pressing too hard because I want to carry that loose feel. And maybe what I'll do is take my 14. I'm going to take some of that permanent sap green, bring it in here, and then I don't want it to be thick. I want more of a puddle. I'm grabbing and loading my brush so I get more water on the tip, and I want this, just like the handle on that teapot that we did last week. I'm going to go and allow that to be a little softer. That means it's catching the edge of the water and moving. Instead of me putting a great big line in there that looks a little too deliberate. I mean, we can do that, but my thoughts were trying to make it more painterly. And down here I'd like to add more detail, but do I want to deal with that now? I can always clean that up. Okay, and if I need to add more color into it, so it stands out a bit more and contrasts with that background, because I do like that green, but it might not stand out enough. Maybe lift it a little bit. Okay, I've got a big puddle right down here. I'll lift that. And then I have drawn in my shadows in places too, so I've got to think about where in the world those are. So here we've got my stems. I'm looking for my greens. And even if I don't know what some areas are, maybe I'll turn them into shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and add some. How about if I do this? That might be fun. Allow some of that color to escape. I'm playing with the water on the brush and how I hold my brush. And I could get more detailed over here because my reference photo has the detail, but then I start drawing it. And I'm trying to let the water on the surface carry the color. So I want to play with the amount of water, trying to put more of a bead right in the center. I'm going to load this up. I need more water. And I would like to draw it a little bit. I'd like to, right, I'm standing up, so I'm getting more of I'm using more of my arm. If I want more detail, I'd be sitting down. And then I'd be able to clean up some of these edges. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and allow that to move. I think that looks a little too ragged. I'm also thinking, do I want to use a different brush that has like maybe a sword brush, or do I want to use a squirrel brush? What if I used a squirrel brush? The squirrel brush is going to add more water. Am I going to get a tapered edge? So let's see. It looks a little more deliberate. And it's okay if I touch some of the pink too, but I just don't want that to overwhelm it. And then I would continue. I think we have more up here. And see, I can't work on my flower because it's wet. And I'll bring some of this down into this area. playing with the water. I do like how that pink has moved. Maybe I'll use the squirrel brush to get a bit more color. And how about if I just drop some of that in? Maybe add some of that blue. I think I like the yellow next to the green there. What's nice about a squirrel brush is that you're going to get really loose. It holds a lot of water. I'm trying to stay within that pencil line a little bit. And then thinking about, let's bring that over here. And I would love to be able to get into the shadows today if possible. So let's go ahead and bring this down. Loading my brush. I could use a squirrel brush if I wanted, that's possible. I think I'm using this one just so I can get a bit more control. This is a blend. And let's see, I think we have a little more water over in this area. Oh, maybe I'll let that purple spill. Now, I'm thinking after I did that, I thought, you know, that might not have been a good idea because that purple, once it mixes with the green, can go more neutral. And that's not necessarily what I want, but let's start with that.
Morgan, is your paper flat or is it on an incline?
It's on a very slight incline. Very slight. Okay, and what I'm just noticing is that I was starting to brush on top of my water area, which I don't want to do. I just don't think it's as effective, so I'm going to go right along the dry paper edge on the pencil line and trying to let it touch those wet areas. So I'm going to use my Winsor blue, bring it into my greens here, and try to play with a little more of a shadow. Want a little more contrast so it can stand out a little bit more. I like the mingling of the different greens. I think that's kind of nice too. And I think it's going to be effective once I get that shadow in there, I think. So see, I don't like all that green. I think that's just too green. A combination is fine. Let's bring that down here, and maybe I'll just play with the amount of pressure on the brush, like press and lift, press and lift, maybe over here press. Now this is a very soft brush because it's a squirrel brush. So maybe what I'll do is press and lift to see what do I want to do with this. Maybe I'll just leave a little space and then I'll come back in later and do something. Okay, so we're trying to just get the basic foundation in. And I'll try to find a few of these other little lines right down here. And then if I can dry it, then I can think about my shadow too. So let's get some leaves in. Just play with it. And I also want to get some of those little squiggles in there, but I'm thinking, do I want to do that now? If I do that now, this will still take time to dry, which would be good. And I could take advantage of it. So let me see. This is wet on dry right here. I'm just trying to get a line in. And over here. And we can always get more fussy. We can add more lines. Do I want anything else? Okay, so I think I could go either to a number 3 synthetic brush, or what if I try a liner brush, something that has a longer hair, like that. Let's give that a try. Oh, I think we've got some different colors on there. We have pinks. And again, for all the little twists and curls, I want them to be loose, but that's going to take time, so I really can't do a lot of them right now, but maybe I can do just a few. And let's see if this works. Most importantly is that you get the idea, because all these little squiggles are going to just take a little time. Let's get rid of, do I want to get rid of this? Let me think about that for a second. I just got rid of some of it. Okay, I want my shadows to go in the background. I'm going to take my Winsor blue. Let's take a look at that. Is that the color that I want to work with? I usually go for the French ultramarine blue. That's not what I want. So maybe I'll use, my go-to shadows usually have burnt sienna and French ultramarine blue in there. But I don't think that's what I want today. I'm taking a little Winsor violet dioxazine. I think I can't help myself, but I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of the burnt sienna into it, just so it has more of that toned down color. And then thinking about where the shadows are, they're basically in here and up there. I think we can get this done. I'm going to go ahead and put some water right in here. I'm going to leave a space for my stem. Okay, I want some blues. I'm playing with the blues and the purples, and let's see. Is this going to be what I want? I'm going to try not to dissolve all my greens, so I'm trying to leave a little bit of a dry space. If I was doing it for myself, I would take more time. That has too much water there. Let's get some of that in there. I think that'd be fun to mingle some color also, maybe some pinks. That might be nice. This brush is a little too big for that spot. What if I took my 14, I think I would be more deliberate with this, but I'm just, I like a little bit of the magenta in there. That has too much water. And let's see, we're going to go up into this area. Play with my shadow. That's a little too purple up there. I like that color. Let's remove some of that extra water. I like how some of that green is spilled in. And I'm going to see if I can go ahead and just do this over here. Let's get a little bit of water in this area. Otherwise it becomes too drawn in. And let's drop that in. Let's see where it decides it wants to go. Trying to find a few of my edges. So if you think that your painting looks a little strange, you can see that this looks pretty strange too. And I'd like to spend more time down in this area. I'll bring this down into a shadow. Let's get that shadow in there. And a little bit more up here. Maybe a little more blue, because I don't want this just to look like more of the flowers up there. And if I, like I said, if I wanted to be more controlled, I would be sitting down. I'd like to get more of those little curly cues in there. I'd like to get the shadows up in here. And that's probably about as much as I can do today. I could always take more time and build the color up more. But let's go ahead and try to separate some of those images. Now, what I did, if you look at last week's meeting, I intentionally kept this loose. I held my brush a little higher up the handle. I was also standing up. So by standing up, I'm going to apply a bit more water. My stroke is going to be looser. And now I want to pull some of these petals apart. So I've got quite a bit of blue in here. I'll remove some of that. I don't need it all gone, just some of it. And then I'll try to get back to the color I basically had here. So I'm going to use a little bit of my Quinacridone Magenta. Now I like the Winsor & Newton Quinacridone Magenta. You don't have to use that. You might have a different color. Any color you want, just test them first and see if you like it. All right, and I could get shadows in there, but I'm going to try to find my petals. So I'm going to go on the outside. This is working on dry paper. So I'm going to just try to find some edges. I'm allowing that to dry a tiny bit. Okay, and so I'm sort of thinking about where the shadows are, which petal I want to come forward. Maybe I'll even bring a little bit of that blue in there. Not too much. I think that magenta works better. And then I'll maybe add a little bit back here. Bring some of that down in this area, maybe just a few spots. There's a shadow that I'm going to have over here. So you can sort of see what I'm looking at. I actually don't like the French ultramarine blue mixed in with that. I mean, it's okay, but... All right, and then I'm trying to decide, do I want this petal in front of this one? Do I want to go darker back there? How do I want to handle that? I think I'm going to go along that edge right there. Now, before I do too much more, I'm going to take the 30, remove some of the extra water. I like the looseness. I don't want to lose all of those edges, so maybe what I'll do is just touch a few of them. This is similar to what we're doing in the lilac, where we're playing with our brush stroke. And maybe I'd like a little more green there, because I see that in my image too. So I'm going to go ahead and just add just a stroke of green right through here. Maybe a little bit up there, and maybe a little green right up in this area. And maybe down here, a few little strokes. Now I think that's kind of nice. We need to do a little something here, and I'm not sure what that is. So I'll bring that in, and maybe a little bit of that green. Now the green and the magenta, if I mix them together, can go muddy. But if I have them side by side and let them mingle on their own, I think we'll be just fine. Now I don't want that line to distract. So when we lose some of those edges like you did in the lilac, then your eye is going to travel around. But if we have too many of these lines, then that's all you're going to see. So I'll just try to dissolve a little bit of it there. I'm trying to decide if I want to keep this. Maybe I'll just touch an edge and try to lose a spot. And then let's go up to, before I do too much, let's go to another one and find an edge. And I'm playing with the stroke a little wide and taper it. Now we were just talking about that magic paper. If you can't find it, you can also, you don't need it. If you don't really have to have it, you could just use a paper bag or any kind of paper, just so you practice your strokes. And I think by adding just a tiny bit of a little stroke going that way or this way, it breaks it up. Now remember, too much of that is going to be distracting. So I'll use the 30 and maybe dissolve just a few spots, not all of them. Otherwise the eye has nowhere to travel to. And then I could bring a little bit more down in here. But before I get too trapped or overdo it in this area, I think it would be a good idea to move on to another spot. So I'll scoot that over. Oh, I like that. I love the simplicity of that. Then I'll move over to this one and do exactly the same thing. I'm going to scoot around. I don't usually use an iPad for my reference photo. And when it comes to the reference photo, I actually prefer the crummiest reference photo I have, because that way I'm not focusing on the detail. I'm just focusing on the main shapes. Let's go ahead and get a little more color down here. And what I'm thinking about is contrast. Light next to dark. If I go a little darker right here, then this is going to stand out. Play with my strokes. Barely touch the paper so it's not just the same size. And as we continue to go, you will see that I'm going to change my brush, how I hold it, and it's not going to be a straight line. Okay, maybe a little more color there, and then down here it would be nice to spend some time, but I don't know what I want to do with that just yet. So I'm going to take some of that green that I've got from last week, add it into this area, maybe a little more of that yellow. So here we're talking about the lighter yellow, darker, a lighter green, darker green. We're widening our range of color and values. Okay. And then I'll add maybe a little bit of that pink. And I'm thinking, can I add it in here? It's going to neutralize, because the two colors blended together are going to turn into a brown, which we don't want, but I like them side by side. So this would be very similar to that lesson that we have. I think it's on complementary color with the geranium leaf. Okay, now I have let that go a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and maybe soften a few of these edges so it's not too distracting. So we're breaking it up so the eye can travel around. And just touch a little bit of that. Maybe I'll come back to that. I'd like to add a bit more in there. So I think that's probably okay for right now. And then I would also need to go a little darker with some of those stems, but we're not going to focus on that yet. We're going to go right into the middle. And for the shadow, I ended up using whatever I had. So I might need to change that, but you know, I didn't really think about it too much as I was doing it. I was just trying to get the overall feeling for it. So here, what if I took my color combination, and that is the blue and the magenta, the color that I have up here, down into that area, and I have a little bit of this Winsor Blue red shade. I'm going to throw that in here. I don't have much. And the reason why I'm using the blue red shade instead of a French ultramarine blue, French ultramarine blue or a cobalt blue is I want to stay away from any sedimentation or granulation. And I'm also thinking, all right, is that dark enough? Do I need more color? Let's add just a tiny bit more. All right, and then going into the shadows here, I'm going to use the same idea. I'm only supporting my hand a little closer. This is like holding it like a pencil, which I don't really want to do, but I wanted a little bit more of a line there. All right, then I'm going to expand that stroke. Just add a little bit there. Look at these petals and decide which one do I want to come forward. This is going to have more shadow, so I think I'm going to go on this side, because I want one to stand out and one to push back. Usually, depending on the subject matter, I might go a little darker in the one in the background, so the one in the foreground can come forward, but here our shadow is basically going to be in this area. I'm going to add a little more magenta into it, because I don't want it all to be the same color because I don't think that's as interesting. So if I add just a little bit of that magenta, that might perk it up. So that's going to be, again, similar to what we were just talking about. Now down here, I'm not too sure how this is supposed to be, so I'm going to make it up. And I'm making it up by how I hold my brush and flattening the tip, mingle a little color into it, because we don't need it to be exactly like what it is in the photo. All right, and then let's bring some of that shadow. I'm going to expand my stroke, like that, over into this area. And I'm going to decide, do I want that to be lighter? There's a shadow that goes down here. That's darker. I'm thinking again of contrast. I think that's just fine. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. Let's get a little shadow down here. Find the edge of that petal. I'm going to expand my brush stroke by pressing and then lifting. Okay, so I'm liking, right now it looks like a lot of different pieces and that doesn't look great. But what I'm going to do in just a second is I'm going to use my 30 and I'm going to dissolve a few of these lines. That way the eye isn't going to get trapped in looking at all those edges. Okay, over here I sort of want a shadow line there, but maybe I'll break it up right in the middle of there. Maybe that'll work. I think that works. Just touching a few of those spots, to me, makes it better. Okay, and then I'm thinking, can I continue down here? Let's just throw in a few little lines. Like that. This is getting closer to being really exact, which I don't want. I might need to break that up. Do I need to go darker with my values up there? Do I need to bring in more color? Maybe I'll go just a tad darker right through there. See if I like that. I don't want that to sit there, so I'll lift it up and allow the color to move. Maybe I'll take that little bead of water and let it travel. Then bringing it over into this area. Let's find the bottom of this. I'm going to play with my stroke, thin with the very tip of the brush, press so it expands, and then up. And the same thing about there. Maybe find the edge of my top up here. Maybe throw a few lines. Now, of course, that can look chaotic and not very good. So we're going to use the 30 or other wash brush or big mop. A mop is going to hold too much water. Why I like this is that it's got a point to it. Then I'm going to dissolve one edge there, so it's going to roll over a little bit. Maybe I'll add a few little details there just by touching it. Soften. I'm not really thinking too much about it. I'm just working my way around the flower. I want to keep this loose. Okay, and then I could go darker right in the middle somewhere. I could add greens, but I think we're doing okay. Maybe I'll come in with a little bit more of my Quinacridone Magenta. Let's see about that. Do I want to add that? We've got our shadows. The greens can go in. We just need to touch a few spots, not much. Maybe I'll go in over here, play with my stroke. I don't want to go too much, just a little bit. And maybe add a little more color right up here. Maybe I want it to be a bit more magenta-like. Or I could have a shadow, either one. I'm just going over the areas that we've already added some color to. And then with the 30 brush, I'm going to touch a few of those edges. See if I want to add any more color into those shadows. I like it light like this. I want to be careful that I don't go too dark. So this is going to be a third stroke in there, third layer. Just a few strokes. We don't necessarily need to do this. I'm basically revisiting my painting. Just a few. That can easily overdo it. Let's bring some of that idea down into this. Just go over a few of these lines. That way I'm sort of tying that all together. Now we're going to go into our greens in just a second. Maybe I'll add a little bit of the pink right down here. That might be a nice balance. And I also like leaving a little bit of the white of the paper showing through. Okay, so before I overdo it, I'm going to go ahead and try to get some darker stems in there. I've got some greens up there. I don't want it just to be more green. I'd like to get some blues in there. And maybe I'll use the Winsor Blue red shade. I like that better. Okay, and let's add a bit of water into it. Let's see if I'm going to just go ahead and try to skip my brush along a little bit like that. Now this is where I could easily get a little, draw it in too much. I'll use my little squirrel brush like this. That way I can get a lot of water in here and touch the edges. Now I like that looser look, so I'm going to just stick with that. And then let's go down here. Like that. I want my color to be transparent, so I have more water in there. I think that makes it nice. This gives it a looser look by using the squirrel brush. And maybe a little shadow there. Instead of me trying to paint everything, I'm just going to suggest we've got some separation of our leaves. And then we can come in and try to add a few of those little curlicues, and you can see how these areas of that color that we just added really lightened up. Let's go to the shadows. I don't necessarily want to use my regular shadow color, which is the French ultramarine blue and the burnt sienna, just because I don't want it to go too, I don't want it to get granular. Okay, so hopefully this is fairly dry. Thinking about where the shadows are, we've got the purples up there. I want some of the purple to come down into the shadow. So I'm taking a little bit of my Quinacridone Magenta, bringing that in. Thinking, do I want to keep it loose? This is so similar to the shadow color, or to the petal color. Let's try someplace that's not as conspicuous, I hope. Maybe I'll switch over to my squirrel brush. So we're basically layering the shadows. At least I'm going to try that, because I'd like the shadow to be a bit darker. And I'm not worrying about, since I want to keep this loose look, I'm not worried about some of that underlying color showing through. And then we'll go ahead and bring that up through here. This is going to be more in the shadow. Okay, that's starting to work. Maybe I'll get a bit more of that magenta. I want to be careful that I don't make it again too similar to my petals. Using the squirrel brush allows me to hold a lot of water. And I'm trying to decide, do I want to go darker with the shadows there to make that pop out? I think this works out very nicely as is, but I'm going to give it a try. Let's go around this petal and underneath this one to try to make some of those other petals stand out. Let's think about this one over here. And I think we'll call that done.